Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if Italy never joined the Axis. Italy under Mussolini became a joke for most of us nowadays. When we think about Italy, we think about Mussolini not being able to defeat Greece, having problems in Albania, even sucking up to the Germans. Italy, despite having numerical advantage in parts of northern Africa, wasn't able to beat the Allies, couldn't even take over Malta and fought France when it was already beaten. And even then, the Italians suffered many casualties. And they were very heavy actually. Italy wasn't prepared for the war. Most of the production was still done manually, while the quality was actually pretty good, especially for the airplanes. There was just not enough equipment. And yes, they had some resources, but it wasn't enough. And also the leadership was very dysfunctional. Moreover, Mussolini had expansionist plans, which he just couldn't fulfill due to the lack of industrial capacity, supplies, competent people, and support. Yes, we can say that Germany bailed them out in Greece, for instance, but because of the Italians, the Germans then had to pass to Yugoslavia, and only then could they come to Greece. With that said, Italy later on was invaded by the Germans when they decided to switch their alliance. Mussolini was briefly put into prison, and Otto Skorzeny, one of the most competent Austrian lieutenant colonel from the Waffen-SS, freed Mussolini in the Operation Eiche. The Republic of Salo, or Italian Social Republic, was briefly born, but once more Germany had to commit many resources to help their ally. Mussolini wanted to recreate a Roman Empire, but had failures after failures, which took a big hit on his popularity. Now, I'm not sure if there ever was a majority who liked him, but many Italians after World War II still had very fond memories and a good critique about Mussolini. At the end, however, fascism as political ideology became totally disqualified. Mussolini was hanged and Italy lost to the Allies, but was spared of the worst treatment they could get. Italy wasn't occupied and joined the West by becoming member of the NATO, the European Economic Community, and later on the EU, and accepted to give away the control of their colonies. But what if all of that changed? What if Italy never joined the Axis? Italy initially wanted to have an alliance with Britain and France. Yes, Italy also had the idea to get Germany in the team so that the four powers could dominate European affairs. However, France and Italy had their own share of problems. Tunisia was one of them because Tunisia had a huge Italian population in there, and Corsica to a certain extent as well, because Italy had certain claims on Corsica. With the rise of the Nazis and the improvement of German-Italian relations, France tried to be cordial until a certain point. Britain had good relations with Italy, but the relations went down when Mussolini decided to invade Ethiopia, and later on Albania. Italy was diplomatically isolated, and because of the isolation, Mussolini needed an ally. And the only option in that moment was Germany. The military staff was aware of the lack of resources that existed, but they couldn't really speak up about it, and so the Italians joined a war which they were totally unprepared for. Sure, during World War II, Mussolini wanted a Latin bloc with France, Spain, the Vatican, and even perhaps Romania and Portugal. Funnily enough, the Germans supported this move, but at the end, nothing could formalize at all. Let's say that in this timeline, Mussolini would not join the Axis, either because he would have strong feelings about the Germans for taking over Austria, or because he would listen to the military staff. If he would not like the Germans because of the Anschluss, the whole Munich agreement could be altered or just not exist at all, and the start of World War II could also be postponed or just be completely changed. So to avoid that, let's just say that Mussolini decides to not invade France, because he hoped that he would get Tunisia and Corsica in a post-World War II order without fighting too much. Mussolini would perhaps provide a bit of support, but the generals would tell Mussolini to just wait for the right moment and to just pick up the crumbs, basically. This means that Greece won't be invaded and later on Yugoslavia would remain as an Axis power. The Italians would not fight the Brits and tell the Germans to not bring their troops anywhere in Libya. This would be, of course, infuriating for the Germans, and Hitler would then call the Italians to be unreliable and lazy. Yugoslavia would partially fill the gaps, and yes, Italy could send some volunteers to the Eastern Front, but they would just basically be a second Spain at this point. Or maybe Spain would be a second Italy. At this point, Germany could do a bit better, perhaps. So let's not forget that the Brits would have a way easier time passing the Mediterranean. Would Germany try to use the Yugoslav coast to take over Malta, or would the Germans even dare to take Gibraltar? The Germans would have enough manpower to do so and could block or engage the Brits in there, but I think they wouldn't be that successful at the end. The Soviets would get invaded earlier on, and then, well, the Allies would focus all their forces in France and from the Soviet Union as well, while Yugoslavia could be in a difficult spot. Italy could at this point decide to intervene on behalf of the Allies, but in reality it would be a solo action. Much of the coast would just be annexed and Croatia would become a puppet state, while Albania could be expanded and Montenegro as well could exist, and the rest of Yugoslavia would basically become like a tiny Serbia that would also serve as an Italian puppet state. This would anger the Allies, but with the engagement against the Axis and Yugoslavia technically being an Axis power, they wouldn't be able to do anything. Over the time, Spain and Portugal, they would conclude treaties with Italy, and after some time of the Latin bloc, it could actually become a neo-Roman bloc instead. Could Italy intervene in Austria? Well, not completely, but they could send some troops and claim that they were respecting the role as a protector of Austria. This would then automatically bring Italy on the table of negotiations, and with the alternate end of World War II, Austria would become immediately neutral, but they would be later on influenced heavily by Italy. Fascism would remain a very popular global ideology, and Mussolini had expanded a little bit Italy's border and influence. A neo-Roman bloc was in the making, but with the Cold War, the US would have to choose Mussolini as an ally. This means that much more money would then flow into the Italian economy, and people would really see a rise of their standards of life. Without the war within Italy and Mussolini giving Italy its place in the world stage, fascism would after World War II be at a height of popularity. With the decolonization process, many Arabs who would adhere to Baathism, they would prefer to choose Italy as their ally. Yes, Libya was still Italian and would still be Italian at this point, but Mussolini also had a very different relationship with Muslims. Yes, we can now laugh about the picture that he had with the sword of Islam, but also let's not forget that Baathism and fascism, they were pretty much similar. And also Mussolini, he didn't actually mind Islam at all. Unlike the Soviets, fascism could find many new allies around the world because they were not atheistic. And even Turkey would then be able to join Mussolini's stance because in some ways their policies could be seen as similar. And in South America too, we could find someone like Perón, who would later on become a natural ally, as well as perhaps even South Africa. Instead of the non-allied movement, we would get a global fascist bloc, closer to the US than to the USSR, but at any given point, they would be able to do their own thing, just like China. The PRC might remain a bit closer to the USSR, while Taiwan with the Kuomintang would have the full support and full commitment of the US and the fascists. Fascism would be an ideology that could compete with communism, while democracy would be envisioned as a long-term project, with states declaring their independence, especially from democratic states. Democracy would be seen as a hypocrisy. Communism would have the edge in Portuguese colonies, however, for very good reason. There would be eventually a transition, be it after the death of Mussolini or the slowdown of economic development or the differences in the various fascist interpretations that would exist, or even fascist US split that could happen, similar to the Sino-Soviet split. Or because people would, at the end, even prefer to have a more participative system, such as democracy. Still, even in this alternate timeline, fascist parties they would be spread, and fascism would be seen in a similar way as communism, with a certain prestige to it, but also with a lot of blood on their hands.